A 67% majority of the public says the legacy of slavery affects American society today.
Oh, we gotta get new it. What are you doing? Stop.
We're told that the history of slavery
This
is
mine.
straightforward and uncontroversial.
Die. Nah. What?
We listen to you, and that's why I'm here to share a hack on how to play with the jelly texture of Paper.io 2, which will help your character reach 100% of the map faster than ever before. First, choose the burger skin from the skin shop. It has the best feature to do small circles, something you will need to do to expand your territory. After doing so, try to find the multipliers to kill all the enemies around. Once you beat all of them in level 34, go back to the skin shop and choose the donut skin, and voila, you will have unlock the jelly texture feature.
Most of the people don't know about the new Thor Hammers bonus. In Paper.io, your goal is to cover the map to 100%.
Period in which an estimated 12.5 million slaves. We don't learn in school where those slaves actually went. Just under half of them, an estimated 5.4 million, went only to Brazil, and many more went to the Caribbean.
Good.
More than 900,000.
Still more?
372, or 3% of the total. The 13 colonies were the lucky ones. The context of global slavery getting put on a ship to New Orleans is really a best case scenario. If you think American slavery was bad, wait until you see what happened to the ones who didn't make it here.
Doi.
First, we start with a West African country you've likely never heard of, the Kingdom of Dahomey. Dahomey was not a peripheral player in the Atlantic slave trade. It was central to it. The kingdom's wealth, its military power, and its cultural splendor.
Doi. Hey, come here.
Sale and export of human beings. By the end of the kingdom, an estimated 1.9 million slaves came from West African coastline controlled by the Dahomey. The kingdom obtained its slaves by waging perpetual warfare upon its neighbors. In the 19th century, a Dahomeyan king named Gezo described the slave trade as the ruling principle of my people. It is the source of their glory and health. Songs celebrate their victories, and the mother lulls the child to sleep with notes of triumph over an enemy reduced to slavery. Now, in many cases, the kingdom of Dahomey obtained these slaves by deploying an all-female military unit called the Dahomey Amazons. They were the chief slave catchers of the empire. The Amazons would raid nearby towns.
Shut up, Mario.
Large contingents of slaves along with the heads of anyone who resisted. One missionary who visited the country in 1861 described some of Dahomey's soldiers as equipped with 3-foot-long straight
Not again.
which were supposedly capable of splitting the Amazons walked out of the palace. They were preceded by a slave girl carrying a bell. Sound told every male.
I'm giving it 1 star.
And looked the other way. If the men didn't get out of the way, they stood a very good chance of being split in half. The Dahomey Amazons ran roughshod over the region. An American missionary named Jacob Bauer discovered 18 depopulated towns over 60 miles near the territory of Dahomey. The death toll was massive.
It's
Gezo,
Panini.
mentioned earlier, built a palace called the Singboji, which used human skulls for bricks and human blood as mortar. His throne sat on the skulls of 4 enemy chiefs. Assuming you survived the Dahomey, which wasn't likely, or taken captive, it was far preferable to be sold to Europeans than to remain in Dahomey. Slaves they couldn't sell or that they didn't want anymore were subjected to torture and public executions. That's because the Dahomeyans believed that they could communicate with the gods through human sacrifice. On average, they dispatched about 500 people a year. Roughly 10% were killed at the annual custom, a yearly mass slaughter. In 1893,
Just use a plain emoji.
reported, quote, hundreds are annually put to death with the most savage tortures. They're dismembered limb by limb, tied to posts, and hounds are set to worry them to death. Their They are securely fastened to the ground near the nests of the ferocious ants of the country that attack them and tear their flesh bit by bit away. The spectacle of a still living man with his body half eaten by the ants being not infrequently seen. Near the royal there are long avenues, and the king desires to receive an embassy with unusual pomp. Gibbets are erected, and on these are hung head downward dozens of hapless slaves, prepared to remain, guarded by the king's soldiers, until death puts an end to their sufferings. Even before the breath has left the body, however, the vulture, in the homing sacred bird, begins his work, and the screams of the sufferers, torn to pieces by the greedy birds, render the vicinity of the palace hideous. Such gruesome accounts were an ironic outcome of European powers ending the slave trade decades earlier. Unsellable slaves were only useful as human sacrifices. But the annual mass execution festivals weren't even the most brutal event in Rome. According to the Sacramento Daily Union, they were, quote, far surpassed by the scenes which take place when the new monarch is crowned. 500 to 1,000 men are put to death in order to provide the deceased king with a suitable retinue in the other world. Then, blood flows in streams. On the accession of a present ruler, so great was the number of those wantonly slain that a large trench was made in the ground in which a canoe was placed. The blood of the murdered men was conducted by conduits into the trench until its quantity was sufficient to float the boat. This was the level of barbarism that defined the intra-African slave trade. The Dahomey literally sailed canoes in the blood of their slaves. They butchered thousands of slaves as an offering to their king. Slavery and barbarism were a fundamental part of their culture. It's worth noting here that although black Africans themselves did have slaves and routinely sold slaves, they weren't big players in the transoceanic transportation of slaves. They also didn't participate in the raids on the coast of Europe that we'll address later in this episode. That's because, quite frankly, they just didn't have the technology to do that. But that's never addressed by mainstream historians, nor are the details on the enslavers in the Dahomey. Consider, for example, Ken Burns' recent PBS documentary on the American Revolution, where he uses passive voice to creatively skirt the question of who exactly did the enslavement.
Thousands were from West Africa, captured from what is now Senegal, Gambia, and Gabon, Angola, Congo, and the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ghana.
It would be inconvenient for propagandists like Burns to point out that the slaves were already enslaved by other Africans, mostly women, by the way. That reality makes the white guilt narrative a little less straightforward. And if they did mention it, they'd also be obliged to point out another inconvenience. Invaded the country and burned the royal palace. The French, who freed their slaves in 1848, built hospitals, schools, instituted social services, mostly through Catholic missionaries. In other words, they brought civilization to some of the most savage people in human history. This year, our sponsor, Pure Talk, is celebrating President's Day by giving you great wireless service for only $25 a month. Get unlimited talk, text, and plenty of data for the cost of only 1 or 2 meals out. No reason that's...
Have you ever met people that still don't use the Uber app and just wondered why? I use it the most when I'm traveling. It's the same app wherever I go, with language and payment options right in the app. I can check the fare up front and book my airport ride up to 90 days ahead. And with all the ride options available, I can choose what...
This is the question I get asked the most. What is the best gift? My answer to them is always Dylan Oaks. Their engraved jewellery is by far the best gift I have ever given anyone. They use precision diamond engraving with all of their pieces. Go check them out at dylanoaks.com.
What do Snow White, Cinderella, and smallpox prophets have in common? They're all fairy tales. For decades, you've been told that you live on stolen land. So we are right now on stolen land, that the Indians were peaceful Native Americans. We massacred them. Your ancestors committed genocide. And guess what? None of it is true.
Have you ever met people that still don't use the Uber app and just wondered why? I use it the most when I'm traveling. It's the same app wherever I go, with language and payment options right in the app. I can check the fare up front and book my airport ride up to 90 days ahead. And with all the ride options available, I can choose what works best, whether it's just me or I'm...
This is the question I get asked the most. What is the best gift? My answer to them is always Dylan Oaks. Their engraved jewellery is by far the best gift I have ever given anyone. They use precision diamond engraving with all of their pieces. Go check them out at dylanoaks.com.
Slavery's roots go back at least to ancient times in Babylonia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome, as well as the Amerindian empires of Mexico and South America. One of the earliest references to slavery comes from this clay tablet from a Middle Eastern city called Uruk, dated back to around 3300 BC, which gives us a look into Babylonian slavery. For example, on one surface of the tablet, there's a notation showing that at least 213 people were designated by the sign combination Sal-Kurt, which means female and male slave, respectively. Young slaves, and specifically infants, were considered the most valuable. Their parents often sold their own children into slavery. The historian Amanda Potamy writes in her book, Weavers...
Have you ever met people that still don't use the Uber app and
No,
just
I
wondered why?
can't.
I use it the most when I'm traveling.
What?
It's the same app wherever I go.
Oh.
With language and
Oh.
payment options right in the app, I can check the fare up front and book my airport right up to 90 days ahead. And with all the right options available,
This is the question I get asked the most. What is the best gift? My answer to them is always Dylan Oaks. Their engraved jewellery is by far the best gift I have ever given anyone. They use precision diamond engraving with all of their pieces. Go check them out at dylanoaks.com.
Legally classified as free or a slave. More famous ancient reference to slavery comes from the Code of Hammurabi, which established slaves as property, set rules for interactions between slaves and their owners, included penalties for harboring fugitive slaves, and had class-based punishments for crimes based on whether the perpetrator was free or slave. Slavery was so common in ancient Greece that most classical scholars agree that Plato simply assumed that there would be non-Greek slaves in the ideal city in the Republic. In Aristotle's Politics, he openly declared, quote, "Some men are by nature free and others slaves, and that for these latter slavery is both expedient
How
and
can I
righteous."
escape?
Indeed, in ancient Athens, slaves
No,
comprised
let me
only
escape.
35% of the population. Athenian slaves were private property and could be bought and sold. Slaves who worked domestic jobs or skilled crafts had a decent shot at acquiring freedom, but there were also slaves who were sent to the mines. They were leg ironed, routinely starved, savagely beaten, seldom saw daylight, and were worked to death with a typical life expectancy of about 4 years. Athens, by the way, was the best place for a slave in the ancient world. In Sparta, slaves known as helots outnumbered citizens 7 to 1. One thing that made them unusual is that they were public, not private property. Because they vastly outnumbered citizens, Sparta used brutal secret police to intimidate the slaves and gave the secret police power to execute slaves who seemed strong and rebellious. Sparta was a total apartheid state and banned helots from using the same roads as Spartan citizens. Every year, Sparta's leaders would declare war on the slaves. Killing them was not considered homicide. In the late stages of the Roman Republic, there were an estimated 2 to 3 million slaves, including roughly a third of the population. Roman slaves